Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to announce our next podcast episode guest, a person that is also joining us as a speaker at the conference. We have Mr. Thomas Bayer of Yanmar joining us from the headquarters in Japan. Thomas, thank you very much for joining. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Could you introduce yourself? Can you tell us what are you exactly doing in Yanmar and how the German is feeling in Japan with a Japanese company?
Well, Georgie, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me as a speaker to this very interesting conference and also for the chance here at the podcast to attract a lot of audience to my talk. I'm working for Yanmar Holdings in Japan in their central R&D center. I work in a group for fuel cell system development. And as you know, the fuels and hydrogen, it's the rock star these days. It's a very hot topic and very important for the future. It's already my 10th year here in Japan, and yeah, I like it. It was never planned for me to stay that long, but usually it turns out better than you plan.
And Thomas, I first of all, I cannot disagree with you. I do believe it will be a very interesting journey. Can you tell us a little bit more on what you will be presenting? Because the idea of this podcast is to give sort of a preview of the to promote your presentation, to promote the topic, which is extremely important. But I want you to give us a little bit more information about that before I start torturing you with the questions.
Oh yes, so my talk will be basically it's about fuel cells. That's my specialty, and I will tell the audience how fuel cells could help to decarbonize the non-road mobile machinery sector. So I will talk about basics of fuel cell technology, hydrogen storage, status, advances, challenges. Then about hydrogen infrastructure, you know, this famous chicken and the egg problem, which is definitely very interesting. Trends in other industries will be introduced, and finally I will give an outlook on fuel cells and construction machinery, what we could expect, some challenges, maybe some simulation data.
So when we're speaking about the hydrogen and the fuel cells, right, in particular, I mean, this is a very interesting field, and it's definitely a rock star. It's getting a lot of attention and attraction lately. But I mean, is this the, so to say, is this a technology of the future? Can we state that? Can we expect it?
Well, you know, I had the first contact with fuel cells in 2001 when I was in the Navy. We had a lecturer at the Naval Technical School, and he was a submariner. And he told us about this new submarine using fuel cells, and it sounded like the future to me. You know, you have liquid oxygen, you have some hydrogen stored in a solid, and you mix it together in a black box called fuel cell to make electricity. That was 20 years ago, and now you can buy a fuel cell car if you want. You can use fuel cell buses in some cities. They have hydrogen trucks on the road. Shipping industry is already testing fuel cells. So you cannot say it's a technology for the future. The use will extend in the future. So the more people will use it in their applications.
So, like going back to automotive industry, right? Many people are saying that using battery, makes more sense in terms of energy efficiency than using fuel cells, because we mentioned in electrifying, right? As you lose a lot of energy when you're producing hydrogen. So what is your opinion on that?
Well, if you look only on the wheel efficiency from the plug to the battery, of course, it's more efficient to charge a battery directly and not to convert electricity into hydrogen. But that's a very simple assumption. People think that energy, the electricity is always available. But when do you charge your EV? Most likely in the evening after coming home from work, and maybe then you have a lack of renewable energy. So basically, charging demand and energy supply must fit to each other. And here you have the big benefit with hydrogen. You can make a time shift. You can produce hydrogen in times of excess energy during the day, and you store it and use it whenever you want. And also it's impossible to import electricity from South America to Europe, for example. You need a liquid energy carrier. So I think it's important to look on the whole supply chain as well, and not only on the efficiency of the powertrain alone.
If you're looking at this from this prism, so first of all, yeah, there is a lot of open questions, so to say, and questions to be addressed about the electricity storage in the first place, and electricity transportation, energy transformation. And also, when we're speaking about, and you made a very good point, which I have not thought about it before, and I do believe it should be something that our community should take into consideration, that when everybody is charging their car all at once in the afternoon, then the capacity managers of the grids come into play, the outage risk is higher. So this is definitely a point which should be really taken into consideration. I cannot disagree with you. I cannot agree with you more, so to say.
But I mean, it's also important to mention there will be not a sudden shift. For example, you will not suddenly have 10 million EVs in Europe. So it's a step-by-step development. So with the number of EVs increasing, also the electricity grid will need some improvement. But yeah, depending on the area, that might be quite challenging.
When we're speaking about EVs, can we concentrate a little bit more about the NRMM, for example? Like, what do you think the future will look like for NRMM in this area, in this aspect, from this prism of using the hydrogen and fuel cells?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I mean, a major driver for people, for companies to switch to EV are policies and regulations. For example, you're not allowed to use combustion engines in a certain sea area. So I think the same thing will be required for example, for construction machinery. I mean, for example, Oslo has, I think it's already decided that from 2025, they will require the use of zero-emission construction machinery for projects within the city. So, for example, when you want to build a new school in Oslo, so the company needs to use, and that's the driver which will force companies to buy zero-emission construction machinery or to rent it at the very beginning. And if this example from Oslo is spreading across Europe, across the world, it's the market will be there, definitely. The question is which powertrain technology will be used. I mean, I believe in a share of all the technology, so battery next to fuel cell, but also hydrogen engine, as well as biofuel or maybe synthetic fuel. So I think the future is still open for this.
And which time frame do you think we're speaking about?
So the first policy which requires zero emission in construction, for example, is in 25. And if this example goes to other cities, other areas, maybe 2030, we will have some larger demand for zero emission equipment. Also, I mean, a lot of cities basically want to become zero emission or carbon neutral. And for their city fleet, regular cars, they might purchase fuel cell cars or EVs, but what about their tractors, for example, they're using to maintain their gardens and whatever. So also here, I guess a market will be born. So I could imagine that at the beginning, mostly city building authorities are buying those zero emission machinery.
It is very interesting, right? Because when we're having this let's say podcast and the talks with the speakers from different industries, they're all mentioning that the prime organizations that are purchasing or giving out the contract is usually the ones that are developing the construction site. So it's not going to be, I don't know, a MAN or Volvo or Tucson per se, but it would be a company that is giving a contract, and they are the ones that are, let's say, pressing down the request for this carbon neutral machinery, which I find, which we find very interesting, because the understanding of the topic was that we were to this was something initiated by the companies that are facing the end user, in this case the manufacturers of the off-road equipment, right? But when we have the end users pressing their agenda down to the manufacturers, this is a little bit, I would say, it's very interesting, and I would consider it definitely as a positive trend when the end users themselves are let's say pushing for the change.
Definitely.
Do you think when it comes to NRMM, will the zero emission be required here as well? I mean, do you think that do you think the fuel cells can be used in this case?
Well, I definitely believe that fuel cells are quite suited for use in NRMM, definitely, depending on the machine, maybe on the load profile. But if the whole sector will be required to become CO2 neutral or not, well, I mean, for example, if you use the machine in the city, within the city borders, I could imagine there you might have in the far future, or maybe near future, I don't know, the requirement to use only zero emission. But for example, in the countryside, I guess they're still using biofuels or synthetic fuels might be definitely all right.
And do you foresee, I mean, usually when we're speaking for the podcasts or at the presentations of the conference, we usually, I always ask this question: what do you think, which industry will get, which segment of the industry will see more impact or more changes right now? So in this particular case, I'm speaking about the construction, let's say, in agro, because these are the main two segments, right? So are there any differences between these two, and what are those differences, and which is more, let's say, tended to use hydrogen and fuel cells, or can you elaborate a little bit more on this topic, if you don't mind?
Well, I think that zero emission policies will be stricter for construction machinery, as you might use them in the cities. So maybe tractors, agricultural machinery has some longer time to shift to new powertrains. Also, I think agriculture is quite a sector with a lot of subsidies. And if you would force them to use quite expensive technology, I wonder if, I think, I mean, it would be nice, for example, for a farmer if he could produce his own fuel on his farm, for example, using water electrolysis to make hydrogen, or using biomethane or other biofuels. So this could be a possibility for this sector, making their own fuel, local production, local consumption, which would be highly efficient, in my opinion.
Yeah, it will definitely be very very good, let's say, way of development for agro. It would create smaller communities where they produce actually their own fuel. So we're speaking right now about the construction industry in particular, right? I would ask you a couple of more questions if you don't mind. When we're speaking about the construction machinery, or let's say the NRMMs, there are the idea why we're saying this should be, let's say, carbon emission neutral is because they're in the city, right? But let's say if we dig into the definition of NRMM, it also can be a cater that is on the river, right? That is also a non-road mobile machinery, right? So do you think it will apply there? Can it apply there? Is it applicable? And is this technology applicable that we're discussing also to that segment, to that sector? Because it's not that much of a shipping industry. It is a shipping industry. It is part of the shipping industry, but it's, I would say, it's inner city, intercity, and it's still, I would say, a part of NRMM. So can you comment on that as well a little bit?
Well, shipping industry in general sees fuel cell as one possible solution, and I think the same for the application you mentioned. I mean, if you would have a hydrogen supply in the harbor, basically, where you could fuel your machinery there also, you could also shift to fuel cells. I mean, it would make more sense than using battery, I guess.
Yes, that's what I wanted to ask from the perspective, because when we're speaking about the construction is mainly under pressure because it is happening inner cities, in the cities, and we have another segment that is also inner city, right? Look, I think we have a lot of interesting discussions and Q&As ahead of us. I can definitely torture you till morning with the questions, but I understand that, you know, it would be best if we will have this question and answers after the presentation. So I want to thank you very much, definitely, for joining us and finding time to join us as a podcast guest. We will meet in October at the conference, and we hope for a lot of interaction and a lot of interesting questions, interesting answers, and a lot of involvement with you and audience back and forth immediately after the conference or after the presentation. So thank you very much for finding time. I wish you the good rest of the day.
And thank you very much. Thank you for the nice discussion and the good questions. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the presentation, and especially to the challenging Q&A session afterwards.
Yes, yes. I think it will be very interesting. Thank you very much.